such a warm day today.
Yeah. Are we starting already?
Cool. Rahul, let's talk about the topic have been on our mind for lately for a while, which is the biases in AI.
Yeah.
I first noticed there are biases through the AI generated output on the image side where I actually today just tested out Midjourney because Midjourney recently released something called a model personalization, which kind of gives you a pair ranking where it gives you like a collection of images where you can choose the one you like. So
interesting.
it has two. It shows up as two a pair, and then you choose the best one you like. You can also skip. So I have this model essentially personalized to me, and I have a default Midjourney model. So I went on, I typed a beautiful woman, and I repeat 20 image each with the default model from Midjourney and my personalized model. The results are kind of interesting because obviously the default models are all just a stereotypical white woman in their 20s looking beautiful, but there is one like brown-skinned woman out of all 20 images that default model generated. And my personalized model is slightly better because when I was pair ranking it, I have purposely choose some people of color.
Yeah.
But I noticed because the data or the image is proposing it to me or presenting it to me through the pair ranking are still primarily more white people dominated. And there are occasionally a lot of Asian people. So I feel like my output from the personalized model was still 70% of a white woman slash maybe I think there's 2 to 3 darker skin toned women and maybe another 3 Asian looking women.
It's fascinating, and we've I think come a long way since last year.
Yeah.
Because I remember last year the problem was much worse. In December of last year, I was trying out, for one of the meetups, we had a game which was guess the movie from the bad plot in there, right? And so I gave like bad movie plots as examples, and it was fascinating to see that the text generated also had like instead of saying Middle Eastern, instead of saying Aladdin, it would say a Middle Eastern person, and so it would inject race and ethnicity into this, and maybe we've come still more ways from that December version of the stability and all of these models. I really thought this would be a cool conversation to have with you, because obviously I'm a fan of your work, but I also should just give you a shout out, like the kind of content you generate, or I've seen you generate, is much more mindful of having a diverse set of people inside this. And so when you mentioned that you have a model, do you have a prompt that you've kind of refined for diversity and inclusion inside the images that you generate, or have you fine-tuned it in some way?
So are we talking about the Midjourney personalized model?
Yeah.
So that's just pair ranking. It's a feature from their.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So they came up with this new feature called
Yeah.
model personalization. So they gave you a pair rank, and they give you this collections of images. It shows up 2 at a time, and you choose the one you preferred. You can skip. So through that sort of a selection process, I skipped tons of images I didn't like, but I also purposely choose some different diversity of looking people.
Gotcha.
But that's the point, is there were not a lot of the data for me to choose, and then I realized, there's a still, so the generation is results as like, okay, like still 80% of a white woman, and maybe 2 to 3 Asians, 2 to 3 darker skin tone, because the collection of data presented to me is not very diverse.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. When we started talking about this podcast, like I mentioned, like maybe there's something that we need to investigate in the user experience, that to have more diversity. And clearly, this is something that they're making good attempt at, you choosing what kind of images you want. But maybe it's the training data that also has that lot of bias in there of like not enough representation, right?
Yeah, well, I think first let's kind of identify or define what is bias in AI.
Yeah.
Like during the articles I've read, according to IBM, there's source of biases. There's initial training data bias, but there's also algorithm bias. Like the algorithm itself can introduce amplified bias. That's kind of directly related to how we build the model itself. And then there's also prediction-based bias that includes the outputs, which I just kind of explained in images or text or other kind of format.
Yeah.
That could also be a bias. So I guess there's like 3 different type of a bias in AI.
Yeah, I almost like preparing for this conversation. I was doing some reading, and it's fascinating to see both how far we've come since last year. There were some articles from last year that shed a light on this as well. There was much more, underrepresentation there. But even the more recent kind of articles, there was one by UNESCO, for example, which talked about like this. What are the biases against women and girls in large language models? I was fascinating. So they used slightly older generation of Llama 2 and GPT 3.5 in their study, and maybe obviously some more study needs to be done for latest models. But it was fascinating for me to see the biases and the output generated, and it's interesting to think where would these biases be introduced if not the data. For example, one of those points that they made was if you ask these to create some stories or general narratives about people, the narratives for men use words like treasure, woods, adventure, while as that for women use garden, love, husband. And so it's interesting to see where these kind of biases are coming from, and propagated more because of AI.
Totally, that definitely AI definitely amplifies the human biases through the output.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, what you mentioned, like stereotype, is the way I see it is like a median person. So if you consider all the training data on the internet, and most of the data is garbage, right? But then you have humans who are cleaning up that data and building up like a more a much better representative set of data to train the model. You still are creating an average perspective, and that necessarily just doesn't have all the diversity that you want. It propagates stereotypes rather than it creates a median viewpoint rather than a more diverse viewpoint.
Yeah, yeah. But that's, I feel like almost introduce another different set of a problem because your it's almost like your choose is different than my choose. Like everybody's experienced the world differently. Everybody has built in their own bias and the stereotype.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's hard to create just a one general AI that can make every single human happy.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's perspectives that come from both the data, but also I I may not want the example to use the example you gave. When I say beautiful woman, maybe I'm using it in terms of like, let's say, a blog that I'm writing or something that I'm writing, and I don't necessarily need that particular photo. In some cases I might, in some cases I don't. I need more representation from the outputs of the model, and not just a stereotypical variation of it.
Totally.
There was also an interesting part about that UNESCO article, which was like they talked about like biases of the model from the data, and you know an example they gave about homophobic attitude. So if you start the sentence with a gay person is, it kind of almost has negative autocomplete. Or if you, for the British men, you see what the adjectives used were, or the job descriptions were. They were doctors, bank clerks, and so on. But for Zulu men, they were like gardener and security guard.
Yeah.
And it's just like interesting to see where
Yeah.
what these models state of the art looks like.
Totally. And if you ask the CEO, it's guaranteed it's going to be portrayed as a white, older gentleman.
Yeah, and obviously age also comes into play some here, right? Like it's not just race.
What
that
are
comes
some
in.
other like common stereotyping you have during your research has occurred?
Yeah, so um, I'll say that like reading through articles. I'm not a researcher myself, but
Right.
I've been reading through a lot of articles on inclusivity and diversity in AI. One of them was about how are they identifying that there is bias, and so there's a really interesting interactive one uh, from Bloomberg, which goes towards like how are we measuring this
Right,
bias, right? And
right.
so um, it was interesting. What they did was from each photo, they sampled the pixel color that represents the skin tone, and then plotted that against like job descriptions or higher level of incomes, and they were finding like, oh, higher paying jobs were lighter skin tones, or more refined jobs like judge, etc., were also lighter skin tones, which just goes to show that when you start visualizing this data, it becomes much more clearer than that one-off example that you see when you automate, or like when you're using it yourself. I think we need more studies like this to identify like what the blind sides are for now.
Right, right.
How about you? Did you have any other sources of a bias that you kind of came across?
Um, high paying jobs, certain sort of positions. Uh, oh, yeah, there is another one. Is about how we utilizing the technology and then the potential issue on maybe secure like facial recognition for security purposes, where if it's burglary, it's likely be recognized as like a darker skin toned people rather than like the accurate, like whoever is actually robbing the store. Those type of things can be stereotyped, or because the training data there is over representation of certain groups in certain what I'm trying to say here is couldn't really find the words, but trying to say where the when we utilize facial recognition for security purposes, there could be issue because the biased data training these systems. Then as a result, it could make mistakes or generating report based on the biased data sets.
So to your point, it's at the collection source where the data that is collected is already biased. It's the it's the the data annotations that are done by humans.
And also the cognitive bias, which is the people who are building these models may weight certain data sets more than less because they have humans as they have already like baked in, like I mentioned, we all have a bias towards certain things. So whoever's building this model may also put their own personal bias into the model as well.
Yeah, and so we come to the people angle of like bias in the models, which is throughout all stages of the AI model lifecycle, from the data, from the training, the deployment. It's at the end of the day, the humans in the loop are the gatekeepers of like what comes out as a good model. So almost what I see is a lot of people say, well, if you have the right team, they'll build models that are much more equitable, or much more have less bias. And so at the end of the day, it's the humans that are both, for now, source of seems to be the problem, but also the solution seems to also be have more diverse people who can help identify these issues at the start or during their day-to-day work.
Totally, totally. That is critical. Hire more diverse people, hire people who are actively building these systems and labeling these data
Yeah.
needs to be diverse, the group of people. Um, yeah, and then the AI governance itself, which is the set of a policy built into the AI models to kind of identifies these issues, that whoever is making that initial policy set of rules can be also really critical. So
Yeah.
it can be just like a one person making all that decisions, policies, put it into AI system. We need to
Yeah.
kind of have, there needs to be a like more thoughtful process
Yeah.
how we make these policies.
And so you're almost saying the frameworks need to exist in order to make these things much more like a standardized way of like removing these biases, right?
Definitely, and truthfully, I don't know we can ever reach to like no bias at all because
Yeah.
humans are flawed, and
Yeah.
but we can build these systems to reduce the bias in
Yeah.
the AI systems.
For sure. I love it. There was something I think you pointed an article about ethical AI frameworks that was interesting. Um, yeah, I also came across an interesting TED talk. So I was there last year, but I rewatched that episode recently. It was by Sasha Lucioni about 8 months ago. AI is dangerous, but not for the reasons you think. I think it mentioned some of those, security camera kind of biases that you talked about as well. But she made a case for AI being harmful, but not in the post-apocalyptic Terminator sense, but that we need.
Environmental.
No, no,
she-
no.
Oh,
Not post-apocalyptic. What is it called? The
doom.
doomsday kind
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah, yeah.
But more like right now, it's making decisions, and we need to fix it.
Yeah.
A couple of examples she gave, and which I know are much more. You've kind of talked about it as much, which is like artists feel that their data are being used for training these models.
Without the permission.
Yeah, and so she mentioned like there was this website about
Have I been trained on?
Yeah. And talk more about that if you can, like, because you've brought that point up when we had this conversation a few months ago.
Yeah, I remember. So she also mentioned that her organizations is working on building something, a system can help artists choose to opt in and opt out of the system. Which I think that's something a lot of other companies are also building. Maybe OpenAI is building on something like that. But like the website have I been trained on is Lion 5 data sets,
Yeah.
which I have actually tried to use it. There are some photos of my artists friends there. There are a lot of photos there. You can use the website to check if your data or your images is on the training data sets, but you cannot really guarantee being you can ask to opt out, but it's no guarantee like your data is
Yeah.
going to be opt out of training.
Yeah, because they're not just using Lion dataset; they're also using a bunch of other data that they've crawled from the internet under fair use. Even though it might not be paywalled, it is open to the public.
Open domain.
Yeah, and it might still be copyrighted, right? So a lot of data, when the training models are using it, they are indiscriminately using the data that they find on the internet. So that was an interesting point she made, especially example she gave of herself, where she said, "Show me a photo of Sasha Lucioni," and other than the first couple of images, first of all, the images that came up after the first couple, which were her, were not her.
Right.
And they were also women in bikini
Right.
wearing bikinis, and so you're like, what kind of twisted data set are we training these models on?
Exactly, and then she gave example, and then after she generated use AI, I don't remember, maybe Stable Diffusion or what model she asked her name and generated a model. Generated a woman with her name, and that it is kind of her head, but with her wearing bikini on the beach.
Yeah. It's very with multiple arms and things like that, which is also funny.
Yeah, well, that just shows that because the data labeled is under the same name, so when model is generating, is pulling all these images related to this name and to generating a new woman named by her. So a lot of these images are bikini women on the
Yeah.
beach. So
Yeah. Clearly, where you source your data and how representative is the data used to train the model is going to be important. I feel a lot of people have used like synthetic data or thought synthetic data might be interesting to solve this. But there was a recent video just this past week, 4th of July, that came out from the Voxel 51's session on deep dive into responsible and unbiased computer vision meetup. There was one point that the speaker made, which was synthetic data might seem like a good idea, but it can poison the data itself, because the synthetic data models were instantly not trained on the right data, and so when they generate the
yeah,
the new data for training, you'd perpetuate the biases, or even like in this case, the example he gave was in healthcare, and it wasn't necessarily with bias and diversity, but it was more like the artifacts that were introduced by the synthetic data generated were not the right thing to do it. And I can easily see that, let's say I train a model and I generate the data from it to train another model, that data is going to already be biased.
yes,
Or what we are seeing now is, let's say, everybody's posting content on social media
yeah,
we are seeing an increasing number of data generated with LLMs and with AI. And so there's going to be this flywheel way of
Totally.
like the data that future models are going to be trained on are bad data
Yeah.
from the current models.
Yeah. Like the most more visual way to explain this is think about it. If you're using a collection of data of AI generated human beings, there's gonna be 6 fingers, 3 legs, 3 arms, and
Yeah.
using that data collection to train another model to generating further output, obviously it's not gonna be 2 armed, 2 legs the human because your data set is already polluted, right?
Yeah, I mean, we all wish we had multiple arms to do more work, but
Yep.
images can be funny. And there's this long tail of edge cases that are not even part of this generated synthetic data, because synthetic data is again median median predictions from the model. They're not going to contain the edge cases, and so we are yet more reducing the diversity of the data that the models are trained on.
Do you think there's a world where we are going to license data that is very high quality, that's being produced by a group of very diverse people, and then they're getting paid?
I don't know if there'll be enough volume though. I think from a social standpoint, many companies will choose to purchase data. They're already paying data annotation companies for a lot of like good quality data, and so you can easily imagine that they will say like, well, why don't you also make sure that it's inclusive and so on. But essentially, the data on the internet is not inclusive as well. It's very much focused to, let's say, the Western world, and
Yeah.
so there's not enough data from remote countries who don't have an infrastructure for internet, or people who are not represented in the data itself on the internet. There's no way that you can find, let's say, good quality data. I remember an example wherein I said like, and this was again pre latest generation, so this issue might be fixed as we speak. But I said like, show me a photo of a doctor in Africa, and to my not surprisingly, it like generated images of doctors in remote tribal regions in Africa. And I'm like, yes, of course, Africa has big hospitals and it has all the latest facilities in the world. So why is the AI generating images of like somebody visiting a remote village in Africa and maybe, which is also important, but that's not always representative of African diversity in healthcare, right? It's just like, it's fascinating to see that those problems existed because maybe they didn't find enough data in the internet in the first place.
But what I'm trying to say is, instead of finding the existing data on the internet, can we put money into producing diverse data
Yeah.
and use it to train the models?
Clearly, the big companies have the funds for paying GPUs. They should have some funds for getting good data. To their credit, though, I know some of my friends are in the big companies who are actively searching for high diverse data sets and actively trying to build these out. So, to their credit, they are making this effort for sure.
What about on the UI side,
Yeah.
UI UX side?
So the UI side, well, let's say I'm using an LLM and it's generating an output. Somebody, let's say, using my product is going to consume that information. And so their state of the world will be based on not what the world has, but what the output the LLM is generating. And it's almost like a very philosophical way of thinking about it. But a parallel I saw is like early days of search. When you do Google search, only the first page is what people view. People don't even go to the second page. They would rather change their query rather than go to the second page. And so what about the rest of the data that's in the Google search, right? Or the websites that don't come out on top? It's the same with LLMs, which is like the top result you're going to get out of using an LLM is the first output that the LLM generated.
Which contains a lot of advertisement.
Sure. And so it's not even like the third page, so to speak, of the LLM generated data, right? And we need to see more user experiences and interfaces defined where you are willing to, or you are able to steer the AI into giving you something that's not like just the front page of the LLM output. It's like the third page or something more diverse that you want, or something more interesting or fascinating that you want. I almost want to see similar tactics that companies use to recommendations or to search to include the ones that are not on the first page. The same kind of ideas being used in what outputs the LLM generates.
Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts about user interfaces or products that are using AI? Because you seem to have some really good content about the actual usage of AI for non-AI purposes, which is very few people right now. But what are your thoughts on how people are consuming AI? What kind of, I mean, these not be technical people, these are like non-technical people. How are they consuming AI? What kind of user experiences would be beneficial for them?
Yeah. I think, for example, I think this has already been done. I think I had some couple of ideas. Now I'm blanking on it, but just for example, for perplexity search, the reason that is a little bit easier for a search experience than maybe go to ChatGPT is because one, you ask a certain topics and questions, it actually gives you a prompt follow-up questions. So in that way, I feel like it could be use it for more personalized, therefore it's not just a generic answer for you. What if like when I typed a beautiful woman in Midjourney, and then Midjourney can prompt me a question, say beautiful women of what ethnicity, like what, more questions, follow-up questions where I can choose from. So then that can, based on my answer of those prompts, and then it automatically put it as an input, like a text prompt input to generating more diverse, the more rich image for me.
Yeah, I had another similar idea, which is not text based, but you could potentially click on the people or click on objects, click on themes inside the image, and then say, well, instead of this theme, like the doctor in Africa being remote, I right click on it. The theme itself, it's not remote, it's like a super specialized medical facility in, let's say, Nairobi, right? Like somehow you have more interactive elements with the image and be able to give feedback and say, well, I need this kind of an image and not the one that was the first image that came up.
Or maybe like the generation could be, I know this is going to be more computing intensive, but what if it's prompt me with very different aesthetics, very different group of things instead of just all very similar image where I can select, oh, these are the things I'm talking about,
Yeah.
or these are the image I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So more in the more visual way.
I love it. I love it. And so, obviously, language models will have a different challenge for interface as well. But seems like Perplexity is onto something. And I sometimes like wonder what I see that makes the headlines are more like the gymnastics video that you saw recently last
Yeah.
week, which is crazy body distortions happening with AI, or the Tour de France video where somebody falls and it becomes like a completely other one.
Yeah.
I almost wonder like where are we all going with this AI that we're generating, and how can we put the humans back into the thing? Is what we are consuming from AI even like representative of the human experience?
I guess our human experience is evolving in the age of AI. It's just it's going to change. It's just like when we first got electricity, when we first got on the airplane, when we first had internet access.
Yeah.
Yeah, our collectively our human experience, how we experience the world, is just going to change,
I love
evolve.
it. I love it. In fact, like the Toys R Us is a good example. Obviously, Toys R Us is if I recall correctly, they filed for bankruptcy a few years ago, and they were using Sora to generate their fascinating AI
yeah, I
generated
saw that
ad
one too.
for this. I know that there's a lot of music and beats being generated by AI
Right.
and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, we are consuming it, so we get to choose what kind of future we
Exactly.
want with this, right?
Exactly.
Uh, do you have any last closing thoughts on what kind of experience you want to see in the world?
Yeah, I think just going back to the source of the issue, I think it is not a. It's not. I think I believe and have read things too that confirms it is not a technical issue per se. It is really a human societal issue. The bias in AI. I think we need to go back to our roots and ask all these questions we have been fighting. You know, the DEI, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like if we can hire more diverse group, we can, make a change among us in humans, and then therefore our data that we are creating will be less biased and more diverse. So like kind of almost going back to the root of the problem is human people problem. How can we fix ourselves first?
Yeah, and fixing the people will fix the AI. I think
Yes.
one
yes.
of the ideas behind autonomous humans as a community is it's not AI that is in control, it's the humans, and eventually we'll be able to steer AI into a better future.
Totally.
And so just wrapping up, this was definitely a great conversation, Claire. And I think you and I want to have more of these conversations, and we want to have it with people who are working on solving this problem in biases and diversity and inclusivity in DEI and in AI. So if you listeners feel like you want to join the conversation just like this, hit Claire and I up, and we'll have another conversation with you.
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome, thank you.